Kathleen Kennedy is not happy. Well, that's pretty typical, actually, but don't bury the lead just yet. Kathleen Kennedy is not happy because she's got a writer's strike going on. Disney wants her to continue pumping out content, and she wants to give accolades to James Bond, not George Lucas. We'll tell you all about it right now. And folks, we are here to explain entertainment, keep you ahead of that culture curve each and every day. It's what we're doing here on the WDW Pro channel. If you like content like this, consider clicking the like button, share, subscribe, and you can stick it to the algorithms when you click it. We're talking about that notification bell. Joining us to help explore what's going on with the writer's strike, with Lucasfilm, Disney, and more, we have the elusive script doctor, always out there, but difficult to find and pull into the show just because he's an actual industry insider who is working all the time. Script, it's a pleasure to have you back. You're in high demand.
Well, it's much appreciated. Yes, I am in high demand, and with current situations at hand, that my availability has opened up a bit more. So I'm happy to spend some time here with you discussing
Script, without getting in trouble, explain that for the audience who may not understand who you are. We're always adding new viewers, new members, and so just explain that without getting yourself into any kind of trouble.
Sure. I am a professional screenwriter. Currently, I am based in Canada at the moment because of certain pandemic restrictions that have been extended beyond the normal rationale. But I am a Hollywood screenwriter, and currently, at the time of this recording, the union, which although I'm not currently a member of, but I have been, is on strike, and as a result, per the rules of the strike, you cannot work for any struck companies until the strike demands have been resolved. And so because of that, I have some extra free time. Certain projects I've been writing and developing are on hold. And yeah, so I'm happy.
Perhaps we should call you the ever before elusive script doctor.
Pretty much, yes, for the time being. Exactly.
The artist known as.
Exactly.
Well, Script,
but
let's get into this article with Kathleen Kennedy under the microscope a little bit here.
Sure.
And I think this is going to be of high interest to viewers out there who want to know what's going on at Lucasfilm, especially after Celebration. And let me say this too, folks, before we get into it, we're going to have some major news coming out this week. I don't know what day. I'm working on it. Got to corroborate some stuff. It's related to Kathleen Kennedy. It's related to the Ray movie. We'll be talking about it soon, I hope. No guarantees there, but stay tuned. All right, this one is out of Fandom Wire. It's by Priya Sharma. Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy not happy with Disney. That's her company, by the way, folks. That's who employs her, pressuring her into making one Star Wars movie every year. It's just too much. Disney has been trying to best its best to sustain. Sorry, let me see if I can English for a moment. Disney has been trying its best to sustain the Star Wars presence through TV series, which indeed has done a great job in seeking fans' attention. However, fans still felt the massive gap between the feature films and the series, as the last feature was Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, which ended the Skywalker saga. Now that Lucasfilm has already given a new update about the future of the Star Wars franchise, production company president Kathleen Kennedy hinted about being pressured by Disney to make one film every year. Kathleen Kennedy recently spoke to Empire and shared her thoughts on the upcoming Star Wars films, which have been recently announced at Star Wars Celebration in London last month. After ending the Skywalker saga in 2019, the franchise also put a stop to the features. That means movies. She recently revealed her plans regarding the making of the newly announced films. She plans to release the films just like the James Bond franchise, which focuses on eventized their films rather than coming up with the frequent ones like Disney does. Comparing the Star Wars franchise to James Bond, she shared, "That's every 3 or 4 years, and there wasn't this pressure to feel like you had to have a movie every year. Stop. Script, this is odd to me. Does this woman know that she's running the studio that makes Star Wars? And does she realize that Star Wars was bigger than James Bond? And does she realize there was a formula in place? Why is she chasing James Bond instead of chasing what Star Wars once was?"
I think I have no idea, because there seems to be a contradiction here. Because when Disney solidified their ownership of Lucasfilm and made their announcements, they did announce for a Star Wars movie to be every year. One of those movies would be of a saga part of the franchise, and the other ones would be kind of a standalone.
I remember this. This was back in the popular days.
This was back in the popular days. That all changed after the unfortunate performance of Solo, a Star Wars story, to which I believe Bob Iger, who was president at the time, publicly said, when it comes to Star Wars, the buck stops with him. And we haven't really had a Star Wars film released since The Rise of Skywalker, although there have been numerous announcements being made. Each one struggled in development and has been shelved in one term, but Kathleen Kennedy has said quite the opposite recently at the celebration.
All right, hold right there, Script. I want to really narrow in on something you just said.
Mm-hmm.
So, talking about there was an intention that there would be Star Wars movies every single year. Solo did not perform so well, and subsequently, essentially, the films were ended with the excuse of franchise fatigue. Sounds like a very unpleasant disease, perhaps what Luke Skywalker died of. But my question to you is, it only took one film flopping for Star Wars for them to say it's time to halt this, pull the emergency brakes. What's going on with Marvel? Why do you think that didn't happen with that studio, considering
Make sure to catch the Pro Show Thursdays, 5 to 7 Eastern Time. Entertainment Explained, The Culture Curve Conquered, live with Pro and all his friends.
I think up until the conclusion of Phase 3, there was enough stability in the franchise and organization for it to actually allow them to have between 2 and 3 movies released a year. And even though the quality did wane a little bit towards the end of their third phase, the return and the engagement was still rather high. When it came to Star Wars, a lot of things changed with the release of The Last Jedi, and a lot of what changed resulted in the poor performance of Solo. They did not appreciate, fans and general audiences to that degree did not appreciate the direction that the movies were going. They also didn't appreciate the new characters, how they were poorly developed, and how through that development it was kind of robbing audiences of being able to see some further development and exploration of the characters that started the franchise in the first place. And when you put a bad taste in the audience's mouth with that enough, they decide that it's not worth their investment to show up again. Even the FOMO aspect, as profitable as it can be, did diminish from film over film. Like the first Star Wars film, The Force Awakens, made an obscene amount of money at the box office, clearing over $2 billion. And you can tell from the metric of the following films that even the hardcore Star Wars fans saw that first film probably between 5 and 12 times in theaters, because repeat viewing is where you get those billion-dollar box office numbers.
A lot of times to watch Han be a very bad parent. Script, why do you think, though, at the corporate level? Why at the corporate level did they pull the brakes so quickly? One single loss for Star Wars, and it was done. They said, stop, no more. But in terms of Marvel, we've had many flops in the last couple of years. Was it sort of covered over by the health situation around the world, or what do you think caused there to be a different calculus inside Burbank?
Well, I think that up until Phase 3, Marvel could justifiably say that they had 20 movies that each grossed $1 billion when you average it out.
Enough. Even though that's a good point.
Yeah, even though the first set of Marvel films did not gross near $1 billion, they did overall in total, and that first set of 20 basically averaged out $1 billion per film. So you had on paper a way to reconcile any potential losses for any subsequent following movies, and that ended up being the case. I mean, yes, they had other excuses that they could rely on to justify poor box office takes, such as the pandemic. But now that we're past that fourth phase, that the reception to Marvel has waned significantly, and their movies, even after theaters have reopened far more than they were for the past previous 2 years, has not returned the investments that they're hoping. The best that Disney was able to get was the Spider-Man No Way Home. And even though that is a co-joint production with Sony, when you look at the credits of everybody who worked on that, they're all Disney employees. They're not Sony employees. So that is, it's a Disney-run Marvel Studios film that's basically being worked with Sony, which retains the rights. And that came out of more of a panic with competition from Warner Brothers to get it done, and not so much with trying to maintain their own Marvel philosophy, so as it were, that we saw peppered throughout the rest of the films. The other thing that was kind of interest is that during the Phase 4 window, there was a different head at Disney at the time, Bob Chapek, and he had his own goals of what he wanted to accomplish, and it seemed to be working in favor of business until he was shockingly and quickly
marched on out of there.
Pretty much, yeah. Just trying to think of a more polite way to say it. Marched on out of there, and Bob Iger came. I think because
how about he was Peter Rice? How's that work?
He was Peter Rice is one way. I think it has to do with the fact that with Star Wars, as popular as the franchise was, as much money as it gained in the limited amount of films it had in comparison to Marvel, it did suffer a big enough loss to make the powers that be at Disney pump the brakes and say, "Whoa, we just took a big hit on this film, and the only one we can probably guarantee we're going to clear $1 billion with is the next one. And if that movie isn't good to really bounce back and beyond that $1 billion mark, we might not be getting a return on our investment again." And as a result, I think that is why there has been a 4-year absence of Star Wars feature films that have been released. I think when the Rogue Squadron film was announced with Patty Jenkins, they were hoping that was going to be kind of a Top Gun for Star Wars, and it would have lined up in its release alongside Top Gun Maverick if that had gone through. However, the team hired to work on that script, I have heard from a number of colleagues in the industry that the script that was turned in was so bad that they basically said it would be better to put this on hold and maybe not look at it again and move on to something else. And
that's pretty bad.
Yeah, and that's
pretty bad considering you could start over. That's really bad.
Yes, and it's just, I think, a collection of very bad managerial decisions that have put Disney in this position, because Star Wars, by and large, was a franchise that would, if you do it right, affords you the license to print money. And it's clearly not something that Disney has done right, not under the direction of Kathleen Kennedy or even the direction of Bob Iger. And for Chapek, the only decision I think he was able to do is have Kathleen Kennedy get a little bit more involved in the development process, because Kathleen Kennedy's history as a producer is of a feature film producer. And since The Rise of Skywalker, her name has only been on Disney Plus shows, which are not feature films. And I think that's kind of interesting, because it's a very different world producing television or serialized stories in a video on demand format than it is for a feature film. There's different sets of rules. There's different relationships that have to be formed. There's different deadlines and different schedules. So it's not really the same in her wheelhouse. So
and perhaps that's why she is coming across as being at least a little unhappy in this article. Let's read on a little farther, and then we'll get some more of your thoughts.
Sure.
She further continued, "I feel that was very important to Star Wars. We have to eventize this," referring to the idea of spacing out Star Wars films and making them into a big deal culturally. "It's quite true, as the recent Star Wars sequel trilogy, unlike the previous projects, reduced the time gap by frequently releasing the installment every 2 years, which also included the 2 spin-off films, Rogue One and Solo. This article goes on to talk about when it might be that we will see another movie. Kennedy has this to say: "It's much better to tell the truth," she says, "that we're going to make these movies when they're ready to be made and release them when they're ready to be released." Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about perhaps releasing movies before they were ready to be released, but hey, I guess that was a strategy that was on the table. So, script, what do you think? How does this portend well for Star Wars releases? Does it portend well for quality? What can we make of these comments out of Kathleen Kennedy?
Well, I mean, it's all talk, and it's nice for her to say these things, but we have to start seeing what the actions end up becoming. One note that I think is very interesting about the eventized aspect and about how you have to make sure these movies are ready before you release them is that Star Wars started off with a 3-year gap between the original trilogy. And even when Lucas started production on his prequels, there were 3 years between movies, and Disney wanted to speed that up. Even though the first film was exceedingly profitable, the subsequent ones were not, and that's probably due to the fact that the quality wasn't there. There was a lot of rushing.
Right.
Even
it
though
seems to me this is this is blaming the wrong thing. Clearly, scapegoating, perhaps, and intentional. I believe it's not an issue of the cadence of the releases. It's an issue of the quality of the releases. You agree?
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, even when they signed that deal, which I believe was 2012, if I'm not mistaken, or 2014, one of those two. Like, I think the official deal was signed into 2012. The official ownership took place around 2013, 14, or something of that nature. They still released their first film in 2015, which was still relatively quick after the acquisition. And also from a marketing angle, a very big mistake for Disney because they're 2 years ahead of their 40th anniversary. I mean, Why would you release a Star Wars film that's not in line with an anniversary? I mean, even Episode 1, the only reason it came out in 99 and not 1997 is because George Lucas had to spend a few extra years on the technology to get it just right. So yeah, it was a little odd on the anniversary part here, but there was nothing to say that Lucas had to release a movie in 2015. They could have spent a few more years really getting everything in order and really making sure it was the best movie they could, so that when you hit that anniversary special, you've always got that thing associated with your film. You still would probably get the same, if not maybe 20% more, because you have the additional celebration of, it's the return of Star Wars on the 40th anniversary of the movie.
And that and perhaps road mapping out, lining out where your trilogy is supposed to go. That would probably be helpful, I think.
Well, at least doing the best that they could, because one thing that a lot of people, and I understand where they're coming from, which is that they want to plan that, a 3-film story, especially off one that's based off of an existing IP. But Disney's own rules said that they're not going to use source material or the existing source material to overlap with the time frame that they're doing. When you try to plan for 3 films, it's usually a bad idea because you have to take in the audience reception of that first film in order for it to properly affect the direction of the following film.
Well, what do you make of J.J. Abrams sort of being on an island for the first film, while at the same time Rian Johnson was working with Kiri Hart over on the story group on the second film, and it seems like there wasn't a whole lot of cross communication about, hey, here's what I'm doing, here's where this needs to go, or at least it was completely ignored. And then, of course, we saw with the third film that you had Trevorrow saying, wait a minute, what do you mean I've got to do this and this and this? This is crazy. You can't put me in this position. So it just seems to me that it was chaotic.
It is very chaotic because the fact of the matter is that they're starting production before the release of The Force Awakens is a bad idea. It takes me back to another prominent studio that was working on a film that they were all really liking. It was directed by Martin Campbell, who is the director that resurrected Bond twice in the franchise, to link it back to the James Bond reference. And that was Green Lantern. They were Warner Brothers, Martin Campbell, all of those people were really excited about Green Lantern with Ryan Reynolds, that they actually greenlit a a sequel to it during production of the first film. And this is a Hollywood truth, which is that if you are focusing on trying to make multiple films before your first one is released, then you are not giving the first film enough credit and attention needed to be the best it can be. You are basically slacking off because you assume it's going to be good because you already got it greenlit by the studio, because the studio, it was excited with the dailies or the direction of where the film is going. But the studio is not the audience. The studio may be paying for the film, but the only way they're going to really pay for another one is if they make the money back by way of the audience to pay off that line of credit and that loan before they open up another one to start working on a production. So if your attention is split between the first movie and trying to also make the second one in the early stages of development, you're basically sacrificing the potential quality of the initial film. It's not the same when you compare it to something like Lord of the Rings, which has 3 books, very detailed books.
I'm glad you went here because I was going to ask you about Lord of the Rings. I'm glad you went there.
Yeah, because Lord of the Rings is already established. It's a story that is told. It has a very large fan base. It has a solid direction. It knows its ending. But when you're dealing with something like Star Wars or the DC properties, and they're trying to tell original stories with those characters, they don't have those milestone points, those markers that tell them where they're going and what they need to do next. They have to develop that during the process. And if you're working on a sequel, you're still developing those points or shooting those points and figuring out how the scenes work together and how they're going to be done in the edit. You're mucking up your perspective on what you're trying to accomplish with that initial film. And that's what happened with Star Wars. J.J. Abrams came in, he did his story. And my understanding is that as soon as he wrapped production and went to the edit bay, Rian Johnson was back on that island in Ireland, starting to shoot Luke and Rey doing their thing. So now he is approaching the story from a direction where he probably just has vague notes and maybe a copy of the script as it was prior to the last few weeks of shooting to go off of with regards to his production. And so you don't have any synergy there because he hasn't actually seen the first movie.
And can you imagine how poorly he must have gotten off with Mark Hamill right from the beginning, then going straight to the island and telling Mark, by the way, you're Jake Skywalker now. You've got to throw the lightsaber, do all these things that don't line up at all with your character or what you believe this character should be. By the way, the character who sort of symbolizes the entirety of your career, other than Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill is the Joker from the Batman animated series. So, Mark Hamill has been loving this character for decades. So you could not come up with a more bizarre way to create a trilogy.
You really couldn't. And on top of that, he was caught between a rock and a hard place because he is of an age, whereas actors at his age group, whether they're male or female, don't get that many roles. And so he was stuck to the point where he could refuse, in which case the studio would most likely write off his character and not in a very good way, or he could at least participate, get some money, and try his best to appease, the audience that helped create the franchise in the first place, so even though the direction is going in the opposite of what his own philosophy was.
Fantastic point. Let me get your thought on this then. It seems to me that Mark Hamill probably did not have the opportunity to know exactly how bad it was going to be, though, because if you'll recall, when he comes out of the premiere, having seen the film finally, he is visibly sickened by The Last Jedi. I mean,
yes,
you never see an actor look like that. I mean, that is one for the books. And I bet he did not know how that movie was going to end. I bet he did not know that his character died. I bet he did not know much about the film, beyond just that, this is not going well, what I'm doing. But I think he had one of those Darth Vader, I am your father moments where it had been hidden from him. I don't know that to be true, but have you heard anything to that effect?
I haven't heard anything on the details of that. I only have suspicions. I strongly suspect that Mark Hamill assumed he survived at the end of the Last Jedi.
Right. I bet he thinks he was sitting, with his legs crossed in that position watching the sunset, and then he'd be back for the next film. He is sickened when he comes out of the premiere. He has a look of vitriolic hatred for Rian Johnson. I was worried for the man.
Yeah. That was one of the things I got. I also think there would be a lot of emotions happening as well, because Carrie Fisher had also recently passed, and he's probably seeing this as their last shared performance, and this is the quality with which it is. And I would not be surprised if he even was probably thinking, what would Carrie have said if she saw this and she was here today? Because Carrie has no filter on her stuff. And if you see some of her interviews after The Force Awakens came out, she is doing her darndest not to say her honest opinion on things.
Yes.
In fact, she's constantly deflecting a lot of the questions. There's a beautiful interview with her and Warwick Davis, where she is just asking him questions more often than he's able to ask her. And you can tell that the only reason that's being happened is because she's in front of all these Star Wars fans, and she's trying to respect their feelings, even though you can tell that she's happy to be working, but not happy with the output of it.
I understand that. Now, talking about someone who's not happy with output, to get to this, let's go to this article. This one out of Gizmodo by Justin Carter. Andor is also resuming production during the writer's strike. As the writer's strike is just beginning, showrunner Tony Gilroy is doing non-writer duties for his hit show. I don't know what, I don't know in terms of Andor if I would call that a hit, but it is what it is. I want to get down to the bottom of this second paragraph because it's really what we're looking at right now. It says, like with Rings and Dragon, that season's scripts were finished some time ago before the strike, since it got a 2-season order back when it was first announced. Andor showrunner Tony Gilroy is said to not be on set and has ceased writing for the show, but as he's also an executive producer, he's contributing to non-writing elements such as casting and musical scoring. So all of this gets messy with the writer's strike that's going on. Mm-hmm. And that's, I guess, by proxy then, Kathleen Kennedy is receiving that opportunity to slow down the cadence, because it's hard to produce things when your writers are not allowed to write. So, Script, explain the writer's strike to us a little bit, and then explain exactly how this works and why Disney has made a very specific title change and how they're addressing some of the individuals at the top of their shows.
Certainly. So the writer's strike is really about the residual model for streaming. Some studios have claimed that there's no money in streaming under the current model that they're doing. That seems to be in contention because in 2022, a lot of the studio executives and some of the people below them received some huge bonuses where that money came from streaming and distribution through streaming models. And so the model that the writers are getting is actually in poor taste, so to speak, which is what the writers are upset about.
It's not commiserate to the past. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
I mean, one of the things that's been habitual with the studios since the home video release back of VHS tapes is that it's a technology not everyone is completely familiar with, so they negotiate based on the information that they have. And usually after a couple of years, they find out how much profitable it actually is. And the Alliance for Motion Picture and Television Producers tries to keep that data hidden from the writers. And it always ends up turning bad for the Alliance for Motion Pictures and Television Producers, because they essentially are lying to the people that have made that content profitable. And they don't want to pay them a reasonable compensation for that work, because writing and storytelling is scalable. So one person, say, can write a novel. That novel can be printed 10,000 times for potential 10,000 sales, and that writer will get a cut of those sales. Same thing applies with film and television. You distribute it through home video, be it VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, or whatever will next be the thing. And then you also have video on demand. So you have streaming, you have digital rentals, you have broadcast rights. All of these things are further aspects to make that movie profitable. And that movie would not exist without writers. At the same time, it also wouldn't exist without producers who liked the idea enough to invest in and get it released. So it is a symbiotic relationship. The mere fact is that because the studios are the distributors as well, or at least have contracts with distributors, they try to keep as much money as they can so that they can use that money to pay off debts, pay off loans and lines of credit. And then with their ownership of those properties, you use them as collateral to buy new properties to produce and release and make more money off of that. The big point of contention with the WGA, which has always been the case, is that they are taking massive amounts of money instead of having something a bit more reasonable, because up until the streaming and internet age, a television show would have anywhere from 22 to 26 episodes a season. That would require a writer's room fully staffed between 6 and 12 writers, or up to 18, depending on how complicated the show was. And they would be staffed for a majority of the year, usually between like 20 and 36 weeks out of the year. So it was a fairly stable type of job, given the fact that it's all contract, that each writer has their own agent and representative to negotiate rates and how much they're going to be paid and what the residuals will be for the script and what types of credit they have. But it was still rather...
Pause right there, because I want to address something that is very prescient in the news currently in our modern world. It's an object of discussion on this channel. So you're saying that on a normal show then, that you're looking at somewhere between 12 and 18 writers, all brought in with their own contracts into a writer's room, and they're there for the better half of a year, correct?
Yeah, usually at minimum, it'd be a little over half a year.
Okay, so one of the things that is included in this writer's strike is essentially a near, if not outright, ban on artificial intelligence and its use inside the industry. Do you believe that the writer's strike is, at least in part, perhaps more than just a little bit, about artificial intelligence and the idea that it could significantly reduce the number of writers necessary once you have produced a show to a sufficient number of episodes that the AI can begin to replicate the style of the show?
I would say that potential is there. A lot of the AI software currently available, even some of the open source stuff, is not in a threatening position as of yet, but it could be with further refinement and with further development. The biggest conflict right now is that those scripts or anything generated by AI cannot be copywritten. So being able to utilize AI and then sell it publicly would be very difficult, because once you get it out there released, other people can take it and pass it along to others without any violation of copyright law.
But you would assume soon that there would be a monetization system put in place for companies to be able to take these AI generated scripts, put a human touch on it. Maybe it takes 4, 5, 6 writers to then overlay something. But I'll tell you this, here on the channel, we actually, and members to the channel can go watch the entire thing. We actually used artificial intelligence to write a Seinfeld episode, and then we acted it out to see, how did artificial intelligence do? And it was a very believable Seinfeld episode. You could easily look at the script as produced by the artificial intelligence and go, yeah, that could have been on TV.
Well, I disagree with that, because I did see the video and I liked it a lot, but no, that script actually, it's still very impressive, and it's also shows the potential of it, because that script that you had the AI generate, I would say, is on par with a first-time writer that's trying to enter the business, which means that it would probably...
So let's do this then, script.
Yeah, sure.
And that's a valid criticism, and I agree with you. But the point in what we were doing was to indicate that, okay, once you have that sort of a script in place, then you bring in somebody and you cut down the time that it takes to invest in drafting that first attempt, right? And then you get to polish it. And so I think that's what may be of concern, is that once you have a system in place to monetize these things, that you can eliminate, a significant portion of the work by letting the artificial intelligence give you something that's very rough, perhaps at the level of a first-year or first-time writer. But then you bring in your experts, and really the people who would be at the most risk then within the industry would be those who are of poor ability, right? The people who you kind of drag along inside the writer's room. They're the first to go, I would say. What do you make of that?
Ideally, they would be. In fact, the irony is the reason our entertainment industry has suffered as much is because the studios have been incentivized through various other parties to hire people not based on their merit, but based on things that have nothing to do with them being good writers. And AI can now actually embolden them to be a little bit better But the other ironic aspect is that if a studio were to say use an AI to develop a concept and maybe a first draft of something, and then it needs the human touch, well, that puts the writer in a far better position, especially as a union, because now they can actually negotiate a rewrite of an AI with a premium. So normally, if they were to say sell an original script and get a bidding war between anywhere from like say 50,000 to 100,000, maybe even up to $1 million for the script, if they are being sought after by studios to rewrite AI work, they can now set their own price. And
that is an interesting point I have never heard made before. Thank you for making that point.
That's because I understand concept of value, and I'm also a way better negotiator than a lot of the WGA members.
Right. I've never heard that point made, and I'm so glad that you made it here.
Well, I mean, it seems like the obvious one. It's like, oh, you had AI write you a script and you want me to rewrite it to give it the human touch. Well, that means you need me more than I need you. And that means that you have got pushed the limits to what the AI can provide and still require the value of the human being. And
you know what's interesting about your point? Mm-hmm. It takes us right into a very fundamental discussion, a philosophical discussion about, well, what is the AI really? Is it, in fact, its own entity, and therefore rewriting it constitutes coming in to rewrite another individual or another entity's product? Or is the AI simply a tool which is an extension of the person who queried it to come up with something? And that's another conversation for another day, because
it is.
To get back to Kathleen Kennedy, but that is very interesting, and I love your logic there.
Well, it is very interesting, and I'll give you one more. If the executive producer is using AI to come up with ideas, what is the point of the executive producer?
Well, we may all be asking that very soon about a number of careers out there.
So David Zaslav is like, okay, all these executive producers that are supposed to be reading scripts and just covering up with ideas and assignment projects, well, they're just wasting time and they get paid way more than a writer. Let's replace them with AI and have the writers come in and use those additional profits to the additional money that they had in reserve to pay them, and use that for the writers to get basically the most competitive and best writers to come in and make those AI generated concepts into usable, blockbuster hits. That's the one thing that I think people kind of realize, is that AI is very dangerous. But currently, right now, it's not dangerous enough to replace the writers. But in its current state right now, it's able to replace producers and directors.
And it's because moving fast. That's the other thing to take note of.
And in order to be a passable director that functions in Hollywood, you just need to know 4 phrases. Do it a little faster, do it a little slower, action, and cut. That's it. You can get by quite along with just those 4 phrases as a director in Hollywood. Now, the thing is that there's a lot of directors that actually go beyond that, thankfully, but there's also a lot that don't. And that's something to think about as well. And AI could probably, come up with different directions a lot easier than trying to develop an actual script out of nothing.
I'm thinking AI could potentially replace Kathleen Kennedy. If we're looking at first targets, I've got some suggestions for Disney. So, well, let's read these last 2 things that I find important, and then we'll wrap this up. Sure. It's been a fascinating conversation, and you brought up some things that I don't think I have ever heard articulated before, and that is always a pleasure and a joy to have that happen in a conversation. So, very happy to have had you aboard. Here's some last notes. Disney is apparently saying that showrunners are not excused from performing their duties as a showrunner and or producer on the series as a result of the WGA strike, and they're asked to be to continue working on anything that's not explicitly writing. And also, it's interesting that Andor is still on slate to hit Disney Plus in August of 2024. So Disney appears hopeful that they can get that show at least out on time, and I would assume other shows like it within that time frame. So, real quick script, what do you make of Disney now referring to the people at the head of these shows as showrunners instead of, what was it they were calling people before?
Head writers.
Oh, that's right. Well, that might be an issue, eh?
Exactly. And that was one of the things that I found kind of fascinating, is that showrunners come with a certain level of price associated with them. But the new title of a head writer was different. A head writer had to usually work pretty closely with the head director of said mini series or streaming series. And they weren't really given the show writer title, but now Disney has publicly said or pretty much affirmed what has been argued by the WGA for a while, which is that, yes, these are essentially showrunners. When it comes to something like Andor, I will just reference another show back from 2007, 2008 strike that tried to do the same thing, and that was Heroes. Heroes was a breakout hit at the time.
Yeah, I remember that, and it was annihilated by the strike. You're right.
It was because they filmed the scripts that they had written at that moment when the strike happened, and they did not see the forest for the trees, which is that just because they get the production ready to shoot that script doesn't mean that script is really done. One of the key aspects that's also being fought for by the WGA is that writers that are assigned to certain episodes, whether it be a broadcast or streaming production, needs to be on set to basically make refinements and adjustments during production to make sure that the quality of the episode in question is the best it can be. That also includes them going into editing as well, and then back for reshoots if they are so required. Many contracts, especially on the streaming side, was not paying writers to do those duties. So in a lot of situations, the writers were unable to go to set because they would either be working for free, which is against the interest of the writer. It's also, anti-capitalistic, or they would try to kind of take a little bit of a shortcut in the writing process so they could use those extra days that they didn't have to spend writing to go on set and make sure that the production was going smoothly. Neither of them are ideal situations for writers, and are not ideal for the shows. And the producers, especially over the last 2 years, especially on Disney Plus, have been seeing that's not really ideal for their model. But right now, the Alliance of Motion Pictures and Television Producers are fighting against that.
Well, it's all very fascinating stuff. I'm fascinated, too, that Kathleen Kennedy seems to be apt to criticize right now the Walt Disney Company, even as Disney is struggling greatly to create content through her studio and now at large because of this writer's strike, which may just wind up giving Kathleen Kennedy the cadence she so desires. Script, where can people find you on this great, big, beautiful web out there?
You can find me on Twitter at ScriptDoctorPhD, and you can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/ScriptDoctor. I also have a Patreon where I provide writing tips, advice, exclusive reviews, and a little bit of advanced showing of videos, and that is patreon.com/ScriptDoctor.
There you go. And folks, if you're sitting at home, if you are a writer who is on rest, a demanded sabbatical of you, perhaps go over and check out Script Stuff, get some assistance from him. I highly recommend that everybody out there subscribe. All right, well, we hope that you've enjoyed this. If you like content like it, consider clicking the like button, share, subscribe, and you can stick it to the algorithms when you click it. We're talking about that notification bell. Memberships are the price of a soda. Consider it. You might get some exclusive content you really like, and we do covet your comments. This is not a video for two people just to have a conversation in the vacuum. This is a dialogue with all of you, so please share what you're thinking out there. Folks, you are the electricity that drives it all, and we appreciate each and every one of you who has watched the entire video all the way to this point. Thank you so, so much. It's a wonder to have all of you. All right, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.